May 1st, 2001. The morning light filters through the windows of a small apartment in Washington, D.C. A young woman sits at her computer, typing something into a search engine that will change everything. Rock Creek Park hiking trails. She clicks through several pages, studying maps and trail descriptions with the careful attention of someone planning an adventure. Her name was Chandra Levy, 24 years old, brilliant, ambitious, with dreams that stretched far beyond her small California hometown. In just days, her internship would end and she'd return home to begin graduate school. But first, one last hike through the nation's capital. She prints a map, grabs her keys, and walks out the door. She never comes home. What started as a missing person case would soon explode into a scandal that reached the highest levels of American government. Secrets would be exposed, careers would be destroyed, and a family would be left searching for answers that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. For over a year, investigators searched. The media speculated. The entire nation watched. But Chandra had simply vanished. Until one day, a man walking his dog made a discovery in those same woods that would change everything.
I was walking my dog and I came across a human skull.
What he found would raise more questions than answers and reveal that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden in plain sight. What really happened to Chandra Levy in those woods? And why, more than 20 years later, does her case still haunt the halls of power in Washington, D.C.? If you want to uncover the truth behind one of America's most controversial unsolved cases, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice, power, and the price of secrets in America. Chandra Levy was born into a loving family in Modesto, California. Her parents, Susan and Robert Levy, watched their daughter grow into someone truly special. She was the kind of person who commanded attention not through volume, but through presence. Intelligent, determined, with an infectious laugh that could light up any room she entered. From an early age, Chandra knew she wanted to make a difference in the world. She excelled in school, participated in student government, and dreamed of a career in law enforcement or criminal justice. Friends and teachers alike saw something extraordinary in her, a young woman who refused to accept limitations and never backed down from a challenge. After graduating from the University of Southern California with a degree in journalism, Chandra set her sights on Washington, D.C. She landed a prestigious internship with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, a stepping stone toward her ultimate goal of working in law enforcement. For Chandra, this wasn't just a job, it was the beginning of the life she'd always envisioned. In early 2001, she was living her dream in a small apartment in DuPont Circle, one of DC's most vibrant neighborhoods. She navigated the complex world of government work with the same determination she'd shown all her life. Washington was a city where ambition and opportunity collided daily, where young professionals came to shape the future of America. The final days of April 2001 should have been filled with excitement for Chandra Levy. Her internship with the Federal Bureau of Prisons was coming to an end, and she was preparing to return to California to begin graduate school at USC. She had already shipped most of her belongings home, leaving her DuPont Circle apartment nearly empty except for the essentials she'd need for her final week in Washington. April 30th was a Monday. Chandra went through her usual routine, tying up loose ends at work, saying goodbye to colleagues who had become friends. That evening, she called her parents in California, as she did almost every night. Susan and Robert Levy could hear the excitement in their daughter's voice as she talked about coming home, about her plans for graduate school, about the future that seemed so bright and full of possibility. "I can't wait to see you," she told them, her voice warm with anticipation. It would be the last time they would ever hear their daughter speak. May 1st dawned clear and beautiful in Washington, D.C. Spring had arrived in the nation's capital, bringing with it the kind of perfect weather that made everyone want to be outdoors. Chandra woke up that Tuesday morning with no work obligations, no pressing commitments. She was essentially a tourist in her own city, free to explore and enjoy her final days in Washington. Sometime that morning, she made a decision that would change everything. She sat down at her computer and began researching Rock Creek Park, specifically looking into the hiking trails that wound through its dense woods. Rock Creek Park was a massive green oasis in the heart of Washington, D.C., spanning over 1,700 acres of forests, meadows, and trails. For busy professionals and stressed-out interns, it offered a perfect escape from the concrete and chaos of city life. The park's website showed detailed maps of various trails, including the Western Ridge Trail that Chandra seemed particularly interested in. This trail was more secluded than the popular paths near the park's main entrances, winding through thick woods where hikers could feel completely isolated from the urban world just miles away. It was exactly the kind of peaceful, natural setting where someone might go to clear their head before a major life transition. Around 1 p.m., Chandra's computer showed she had visited a Washington Post website article about the park's trail system. She printed out a map, carefully studying the route she planned to take. Security cameras in her apartment building would later capture her leaving around 2 p.m., dressed casually in workout clothes, a gray t-shirt, black leggings, and white running shoes. She carried a small bag and wore headphones, looking exactly like any other young woman heading out for an afternoon of exercise and fresh air. But as the afternoon stretched into evening, Chandra didn't return. Her parents, calling from California for their nightly check-in, got no answer. The phone rang and rang in her empty apartment. At first, they weren't overly concerned. Chandra was 24 years old, living independently in a major city. Maybe she had decided to grab dinner with friends. Maybe she was out enjoying her last few days of freedom before graduate school. But as the hours passed and turned into a full day, their concern grew into genuine worry. By May 2nd, when Chandra still hadn't answered her phone or returned their calls, Susan and Robert Levy knew something was terribly wrong. Their daughter wasn't the type to disappear without explanation. She wasn't the type to leave her family worried and wondering. When police finally gained access to her apartment, everything looked completely normal. Her belongings were neatly arranged, ready for her departure. Her purse was there, containing her identification, credit cards, and cash. Her plane ticket home to California sat on her desk, unused. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that anything violent had occurred. It was as if Chandra had simply stepped out for a moment, planning to return any minute. But she never did return. And with each passing hour, the mystery of her disappearance grew deeper and more troubling. Where had she gone after printing that map? Had she made it to Rock Creek Park as planned? And if she had reached those wooded trails she'd been researching, what could have happened to her there? The young woman who had walked out of her apartment building that spring afternoon, excited about her future and ready for one last adventure, had vanished without a trace. Not just from her building, not just from her life, but seemingly from the earth itself. What no one knew yet was that Chandra's disappearance would soon uncover secrets that reached the very pinnacle of American political power. The missing intern case was about to become a national scandal that would consume the media, destroy careers, and raise questions about justice that persist to this day. If you're finding this case as mysterious and compelling as we are, make sure to hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think happened to Chandra. Your engagement helps us continue investigating these important stories and bringing attention to cases that deserve answers. For the first 3 weeks after Chandra vanished, investigators treated her disappearance as a routine missing person case. A young woman, new to the big city, probably got lost or decided to extend her stay without telling anyone. The D.C. Metropolitan Police had seen it before, ambitious young people who came to Washington and sometimes got overwhelmed by the pressure and pace of life in the nation's capital. But on May 22nd, everything changed. As detectives dug deeper into Chandra's personal life, Interviewing friends, co-workers, and acquaintances, they uncovered something that would transform this missing person investigation into a national scandal that would dominate headlines for months. Chandra had been involved in a secret relationship with a married congressman. The revelation hit Washington like a political earthquake. Gary Condit was a 52-year-old Democratic representative from California, a member of the Blue Dog Coalition known for his conservative Democratic positions. For over 30 years, he had been married to Carolyn Condit, with whom he had 2 grown children. To the outside world, he was the picture of a devoted family man and dedicated public servant. But behind the carefully constructed public image lay a different reality. Condit had been carrying on an affair with the young intern who had now mysteriously disappeared. The relationship had been going on for months, conducted in secrecy through carefully orchestrated meetings and private phone calls. When news of the affair broke, it sent shockwaves not just through Washington's political establishment, but across the entire nation. Cable news channels devoted hours to the story. Newspaper headlines screamed about scandal in the halls of power. Suddenly, Chandra's disappearance wasn't just about a missing person, it was about power, politics, secrecy, and the length someone might go to protect their career and reputation. The media response was immediate and relentless. Reporters camped outside Condit's office building, following him to his car, shouting questions he refused to answer. Camera crews stationed themselves outside his apartment, documenting his every move. The congressman, who had once operated in relative anonymity, now found himself at the center of the biggest political scandal since Monica Lewinsky. But Condit's response to the crisis only made the situation worse. Instead of being forthcoming with investigators, he appeared evasive and defensive. When police first approached him about his relationship with Chandra, he categorically denied any romantic involvement. He claimed they were merely acquaintances, that he had met her only a few times in professional settings. It wasn't until investigators presented him with evidence of their relationship, phone records, witness statements, and other proof of their frequent contact, that Condit finally admitted to what he carefully termed a close friendship with Chandra. Even then, he refused to use the word affair, clinging to euphemisms and carefully worded statements that fooled no one. The public began to ask disturbing questions. If a powerful congressman could maintain such an elaborate deception about his personal life, what else might he be hiding? If his career and reputation were on the line, if the scandal threatened to destroy everything he had built over decades in politics, how far would he go to protect himself? Chandra's heartbroken family, watching their daughter's private life become tabloid fodder, was devastating. But they also hoped that the intense media attention might finally lead to answers. Surely someone, somewhere, knew what had happened to their daughter. Surely all this scrutiny would eventually uncover the truth. The case that had started as a simple missing person report was now a national obsession, dissected nightly on cable news and debated endlessly on talk radio. But despite all the media coverage, all the speculation, all the political intrigue surrounding Gary Condit, one crucial fact remained unchanged. Chandra Levy was still missing, and the truth about what happened to her remained as elusive as ever. The D.C. Metropolitan Police suddenly found themselves investigating not just a disappearance, but a case that was now under the microscopic scrutiny of the entire nation. Every decision they made was analyzed by legal experts on cable news. Every misstep was criticized by politicians and pundits. The pressure was unlike anything the department had ever experienced, and it showed in their handling of the case. Initially, investigators had focused their search efforts on Rock Creek Park, the destination Chandra had been researching before she vanished. Teams of officers combed through the dense woods using trained search dogs, helicopters equipped with thermal imaging, and dozens of volunteers from the community. They searched established trails, hidden ravines, and remote areas where someone might hide evidence or where an accident might have occurred. But week after week, despite their exhaustive efforts, they found absolutely nothing. The discovery of Chandra's affair with Congressman Condit completely shifted the investigation's focus and resources. Suddenly, detectives weren't just looking for a missing person who might have gotten lost on a hiking trail. They were investigating a potential crime that involved one of the most powerful and well-connected men in Washington, D.C. Every aspect of Condit's life came under intense scrutiny as he became the primary person of interest in the case. But Condit's cooperation with law enforcement was frustratingly limited and carefully orchestrated by his team of high-powered attorneys. When police requested permission to search his Washington apartment, he agreed only to what his lawyers termed a limited and consensual search of common areas. Investigators were not allowed to examine his personal belongings, his computer, or any private spaces where evidence might have been concealed. When detectives asked Condit to submit to a polygraph examination, he initially refused outright, with his attorneys claiming such tests were unreliable and inadmissible in court. Months later, under intense public pressure, Condit finally agreed to take a polygraph, but only one administered by a private examiner hired by his own legal team, not by law enforcement. The results of that test were never made public, and police were not allowed to ask their own questions or observe the examination. As investigators dug deeper into Condit's personal life, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. They discovered that the congressman had a long history of relationships with young women, many of them significantly younger than his own children. Flight attendant Anne-Marie Smith came forward publicly, revealing that she too had been involved in a secret affair with Condit that had lasted for years. She provided investigators with recorded phone conversations and other evidence of their relationship. Other women began to contact police privately, sharing similar stories of encounters with the congressman. A picture emerged of a man who routinely used his position of power and influence to pursue extramarital relationships, all while carefully maintaining his public image as a devoted family man and moral leader in Congress. Meanwhile, the search for any trace of Chandra continued relentlessly. Investigators interviewed every person they could find who had any connection to her: friends from California, co-workers at the Bureau of Prisons, fellow interns, neighbors, and her apartment building. They traced her movements through security cameras, analyzed her phone records, and examined her credit card statements for any clue about where she might have gone after leaving her apartment on May 1st. But after she walked out of her building that Tuesday afternoon, it was as if Chandra had simply evaporated. No security camera captured her entering Rock Creek Park. No witness remembered seeing her on any of the trails. No evidence suggested she had ever made it to her intended destination. The trail went completely cold just blocks from her front door. The investigation took an even more disturbing turn when police began looking into other unsolved disappearances and attacks in the Washington, D.C. area. Could Chandra's case be connected to other violent crimes? Were there patterns that investigators had missed? The possibility that a serial predator might be targeting young women in the nation's capital sent waves of fear through the community and added urgency to the search. As months passed without any breakthrough, the intense media spotlight that had initially focused on the case began to shift to other stories. The attacks of September 11th, 2001, fundamentally changed the national conversation, and suddenly the missing intern and the congressman's scandal seemed like relics from a different era. The 24-hour news cycle moved on, but for Chandra's family, every day without answers felt like an eternity of agony and uncertainty. Then, on May 22nd, 2002, exactly 1 year and 3 weeks after Chandra disappeared, a man walking his dog in a remote section of Rock Creek Park made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden in a heavily wooded area, far from any established trail, he found scattered human remains. The location was less than 4 miles from Chandra's apartment, deep in the very park she had been researching the day she vanished. But the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. This area of the park had supposedly been searched multiple times by police teams, volunteers, and specially trained search dogs. How had they missed these remains for over a year? DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Chandra Levy. But the condition and location of the remains provided few clues about what had actually happened to her. The case that had captivated the nation for over a year had reached a critical turning point, but the most important questions remained unanswered. So far, investigators had confirmed Chandra was no longer missing. She had lost her life in those woods. But they still had no clear suspect, no definitive motive, and no physical evidence that could lead them to whoever was responsible. The congressman remained under a cloud of suspicion, but there was no concrete evidence linking him to any crime. The investigation that had begun with such hope and determination seemed to have reached a devastating dead end. What had really happened to Chandra during those final hours in Rock Creek Park? Was her tragic fate connected to her relationship with Gary Condit, or had she simply encountered danger in the wrong place at the wrong time? The discovery of her remains should have provided closure, but instead, it only deepened the mystery that continues to haunt investigators today.